So Chris, are you ready for me just to go ahead and pray and feel like we've got church already, right?
It's not supposed to mean.
So I've got a couple questions that I want to ask us this morning as we continue to look at the foundation of our faith in the book of Genesis. And again, holiday weekend, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for those who are joining us online as well. But my question I want to ask is, do you ever wish you could have a do-over? Do you wish you could go back and just kind of hit reset? My son and I, there were times when we would play a video game way back in the day. I haven't played this, but like Call of Duty, right? And there were times that we would get so frustrated, you just hit this little reset button and it would start all over because we'd get so frustrated that we were losing or somebody was getting us. And sometimes I've thought about that as a pastor, and I'm like, if I could only go back to April 4th, or whatever it was, and just kind of hit reset on that day. And then here's the other side of it. As a Christian, now, so there's things that many of us are like, before I became a Christian, I'd like to really not have done that or that. But then what about after I become a Christian? And I've been walking with Jesus, like I read my Bible and I pray and I have devotions and maybe even a prayer journal, and I'm really making strides, and then I do something that is not godly and Christ-like. And my question I want to ask is, when that happens, what is your view of God? When you've been walking with God, you're growing, you're becoming more mature, and then you make a foolish decision. Or you don't seek Him and you end up doing something that you regret. Or it's a sin. Or you intentionally chose to sin. And you're like, I know better. And here's my question. When that happens, not if, but when that happens, what is your view of God? In other words, what do you think God looks down at you, and how does He feel about you? Does He hate you? Is He mad at you? Disappointed? Has He written you off? I just want you to chew on that as we go through chapter 20 of Genesis. Chapter 20 of Genesis. I've entitled it, When We Make Foolish Decisions. Because as we've left Abraham and Sarah, last week we kind of uncovered the whole Sodom and Gomorrah and the destruction. But during that kind of initial story, the angels and the Lord assure Sarah, hey, by the time next year, you're gonna have a baby. And so there's a short period of time that occurs, and I think what we're going to read about with Abraham, I mean, theologians have kind of gone back and forth on some of the reading, like, did Abraham sin? They all agree it was at least foolish what he was doing, and let's unpack that. So this morning, the title, When We Make Foolish Decisions, number one, it's common because we didn't seek the Lord. It's common because we didn't seek the Lord. So again, very shortly after Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, watch last week's message, Genesis 20 verse 1, now Abraham moved on from there. Where's there? Hebron. He moved on from there into the region of the Negev, and he lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while, he stayed in Gerar. Now, here's a potential map that, and by the way, these are really cool maps. I think it's called casualenglishbible.com. You ought to go check it out. I can't get this image unless I pay for it. I'm too cheap for that. But I definitely let you know where I got it from. But so over here in the middle right, you'll see Jerusalem, and then you see where Hebron is. And then the Dead Sea, that's where Sodom and Gomorrah occurred down at the bottom right there. But it's probably a 200-mile journey, and it appears that he's right there near modern-day Gaza, right? Well, Gerar is where the Philistines eventually are going to settle. I go back to this whole comment about the scriptures are silent, and so Pastor Dan, you can get in trouble because you're going to say something that the scripture's silent on, but it's one way or the other. Now Abraham, verse 1, moved on from there into the region. So it doesn't say that he did seek the Lord about whether he should move on. It doesn't say that he didn't seek the Lord. We are going to find out, though, that there's some things that happen with Abraham that are consequences of this verse. And so therefore, many, if not most theologians believe that he's at least being foolish, if not sinful. All right, let's move on. Number 2. When we make foolish decisions, number 2, we end up lying out of fear. Now, you're going to see the fear part in just a moment. But number 1, we didn't seek the Lord. And number 2, it leads to, or we end up lying when we make foolish decisions. And if you've ever made a foolish decision, perhaps you're looking back going, yeah, and that's where I lied about it. But anyway, verse 2. And there Abraham said to his wife Sarah, she's my sister. Now, if you're a student of the scriptures, you might remember back in Genesis 12, the same story kind of occurred, the same event happened there. That's where we've heard this before. It was 25 years earlier. Now, since chapter Genesis 12, we haven't heard Abraham and Sarah describe this or have other opportunities, but I was reading, one theologian was like, well, we think that they could have been continuing this and would have told many people, oh yeah, let them know in this circumstance that she's my sister. Now, Sarah would have been 65 years old, and this is back in Genesis 12, and Pharaoh asked Abram about Sarai, and he said, she's my sister. Now, it's a half-truth. We're going to see down later on in verse 12, it's a half-truth, but a half-truth is still a lie. It's not a full truth. Here's the thing. Abraham knows the Lord. 2 weeks ago, I started off this whole year with a message about how we can be God's friend in 2024, because God said of Abraham, he's my friend. And so there's been these moments that Abraham has actually literally walked with the Lord. Presence, like we just saw last week. And so Abraham knows the Lord. He's spoken to him. Right now he's 100 years old and Sarah is 90. And so my question is, can you relate to Abraham in his foolishness? Can you relate to him though? And the reason I ask that is because I just haven't met that many Christians that are sinless, that we've arrived. Oh yeah, you can ask my wife. She's like, I think it's been over 500 or 600 days since my husband sinned. I just don't know anybody who's has this amazing run of righteousness and sinlessness apart from Jesus, right? But can you relate to him that not too long ago he was walking? Can you picture this? He's walking with the Lord and 2 angels, and they're like, hey, should we tell him what we're about to do to Sodom and Gomorrah? And then after he sees the fire, the brimstone, and sees what happens to Sodom and Gomorrah, I don't know, maybe you and I would be like, yeah, I'm going to be running, I'm going to seek the Lord on everything. Because if he can do that to Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm just going to, you got me, you win. I submit it. I'm never sinning or not seeking you again. You would kind of think that, but this is what I love about the scriptures. This is what I love about Abraham. And the way that we can relate is because if this has ever happened to you, sometimes You're walking with the Lord, and somebody cuts you off in traffic. There's that relative, that adult sibling, who they just say it in that way, and they're just pushing your button. Or there's somebody at work, or it's the comment from the boss, or it's the comment from the people that you know, and you know they're doing it just to get a rise out of you because they're just mean. And you react like you used to react. You're not reacting like a faithful, submissive disciple of Christ. No, you're kind of being like your old self. And I think that, again, there's still some old self stuff going on with Abraham here. And I think this is what Paul was talking about when he talked about the old nature. Like, I had 2 verses here, 2 sections. He goes, just a reminder that if you are in Christ, the new creation has come, the old is gone, the new is here. When we become a Christian, we have this new, brand new being. We are brand new. But here's the thing. In Romans 7, Paul said, I find this law at work within. He's like, although I want to do good, evil's right there with me. Anyone relate to that? For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin that is at work within me. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? In my years of ministry, for example, I've talked to individuals men who have struggled, if not been addicted to pornography. And as they're coming out of it, as they're getting cleansed, there's all this mind stuff, there's all this discipline that they're processing and working through. But this kind of thing where they would say, there's been so much that's washed through my brain that I'm like, there's this law of sin going on up here. What a wretched man I am. It's just like become this habit. Or there's other people who have had, pick your sin, and it becomes like this habit. And we can identify with this. And I think Abraham would be able to identify with this. Billy Graham, I've talked about this. I don't have an image for it or anything, but it was the story of the Eskimos with the 2 dogs. In this example, one was white and one was black. And the Eskimos, they'd come in from their miners and gold from the hills. And the story was this Eskimo would let the dogs fight, and one would win, one would lose, and then the next week the other one would win, the other one would lose, and the next week, you never really knew. So finally somebody asked them, how do you know which dog's going to win? And the Eskimo said, it's the one that I feed the most. And the point of all this is, what are you feeding? Are you feeding the new nature within? This is why we talk about reading the scriptures. This is why we talk about prayer. This is why we talk about making sure that in your circle of influence, you've got some godly people who are speaking love and truth into your life. What do you feed? Because if you feed the flesh, you're really going to struggle. So, all right, well, here's Abraham. He just left Hebron, and now he's living in Gerar. He lies about Sarah, and here's point number 3. When we make foolish decisions, we experience unnecessary consequences. Look, and Abram said to his wife, she's my sister. So the king of Gerar, Abimelech, he sent for Sarah and took her. Now, you remember a couple chapters ago, something like this happened where Abraham went and rescued Lot. And Abimelech must be, pretty, because Abraham didn't go after him. And I'm just, if you and I we make some foolish decisions, and then we're dealing with some unnecessary circumstances or consequences that never would have occurred if we just would have, number 1, sought the Lord. And again, Sarah at 90, by the way, if the king took her, it's because she was still very beautiful. You just need to know that's kind of what's going on there. And so, but Abraham says, no, she's not my wife, she's my sister. Now, I'm just kind of imagining Abraham going, how did I get here? Like, we just, not too long ago, we're up in Hebron, and now I'm down here, and I was there. The Lord promised Sarah was going to have the promise was going to come through her womb. Like, Lord, what is going on? Genesis 17 just reminded that when the Lord said, I don't know if you remember this, but He said, I'll establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear. The point being, it was laid out there. And so here you've got Abraham, and he's like, so this king just took my wife. How did I get here? If you can just imagine. So the trajectory of this story in just a couple verses has gone from bad to getting worse, right? And here's what you need to hear. The next two words in the next verse are, but God. But God. You see, God, oh, foolish Pastor Dan. Oh, foolish you. Oh, foolish all of us who are walking with Jesus. Thank God that God will still intervene. But God. You see, Abraham, what's he going to do? I'm going to get my little mini army here, and we're going to go after King of... No. The Lord's like, I got this. I got this. Oh, Abraham. Oh, Dan. Oh, but God. But God came to Abimelech in a dream. So, okay. In a dream one night and said to him, you're as good as dead. Because of the woman you have taken, she's a married woman. And if any of you have had really vivid dreams, and I joked the other week where my daughter or my wife, came in and they're like all upset about something, and I'm like, what? And it was just a dream, but it was very real, right? But this is not just something that was bad pizza the night before. This was real, and it has King Abimelech's attention. And I love that verse, but God. And it reminded me of Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who've been called according to His purpose. I got an email earlier this week from an individual, and they were just praising God and thanking God and where they are today and where they've come from. And it's been 10 plus years that they were not in a good place. And where they are today, they were just like, praise and thanks be to God. And I replied back, and I shared Romans 28 again. I said, man, I'm so stinking proud of you. That's what I said too. I'm so stinking proud of you. Because we know that in all things, God works for the good to those who love Him. God will intervene. And He can make our foolish decisions, and He can turn them into good. Amen? So it's a dream. You're as good as a dead man. That's okay. Verse 4. Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said to the Lord in the dream, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did He not say to me, she's my sister, and didn't she also say he's my brother? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands. By the way, when something like this would happen and you just like take a bunch of women from the other person, like the other individual's group harem, it was common. So, another clear conscience. I have integrity. Verse 6, then God said to him in a dream, continues the same dream, yes, I know that you did with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against her? No. Sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you don't, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die, sinning against me. Again, just the reminder about adultery. Adultery is always a sin against God and the other person, but it's always a sin against God. You can look later, I'm not going to unpack all that, but Paul reiterates this as well. And the reason occurred back in Genesis, first 2 chapters, because God instituted marriage, one man, one woman equals one flesh. That is God's design. So, Abraham. I love this verse. Abraham. So he messed up. I don't know what word you want to say. Was it foolish? Any of us feel like, yeah, I think Abraham, this would be an actual sin. But here's what that question I asked at the very beginning of the message. How does God view Abraham? How does God view you when you have done something foolish? He says he's a prophet, right? Go back, Miss Terry, for a second. He calls him a prophet, and I'm going to pray. He's going to pray for you, and you will live. So some of us, when we're in the land of messed upness, yeah, I don't know what kind of word that was, but when we're in that place and we look and we're like, you know what, I know God, like, you hate me. I know God feels like I'm a loser. God is just ready to judge me, and anything bad or anything that doesn't work out like good or in my favor or something that I like, it means that He is mad, and I just hope one day, God, you will forgive me. Like, we come to God in these terms. And so my question is, again, for you, if you consider and can remember a sin or foolishness that you've committed in the past, is God still holding that over you? Is God still looking at you saying, you are a loser? I should have sent you over to Sodom and Gomorrah and just smoked the whole lot of you. Like, no, I mean, God says to Abimelech, no, he's a prophet. He's my guy. And again, a couple weeks ago, God said of Abraham, he's my friend. He's a friend of God. Oh, the mercy and the grace of Jesus. So verse 8, early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials. And when he told them all that had happened, okay, it's a dream, right? Yeah, no, this was real. This was like life-changing for Abimelech. They were very much afraid. Can you imagine the king coming in and just saying, hey, this was the dream I had? They're like, well, you know, we did have some weird pizza, or maybe the bacon wasn't cooked properly. This was legit, and they were afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said, what have you done to us? Where's the blame coming? Is Abimelech blaming the Lord? No. Is Abimelech, is he blaming Sarah? No. Abraham, this is on you, man. And Abimelech called Abraham and he said, what have you done to us? And then he says, how have I wronged you that you would bring so much guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done. Wow. Abimelech. Okay. That's a mic drop, right? Abraham, this is on you. And so Abimelech seeks an answer. He wants to know. In verse 10, Abimelech asked Abraham, what was your reason for doing this, man? And Abraham replied, I said to myself, there's surely no fear of God in this place, and they'll kill me because of my wife, because she's so beautiful. You see, point number 5, it's often based on fear as to why we make foolish decisions. Not always, but here in this case. And so that's why I come back and I'm like, okay, Abraham, you weren't weren't making this decision based on trusting of the Lord. It was out of fear. You thought they were going to kill you. And it goes back to part 1. He didn't seek the Lord. And maybe, Abraham, you shouldn't even have been in Gerar in the first place. This is why we seek God in everything. You got business decisions? Yep. Got to seek the Lord. Got to seek the Lord. I mean, what would it have taken for Abraham just at that moment to say, you know what? Before we head on down and leave Hebron, maybe we should seek the Lord. Yeah, that's a great idea. Your family, you're making investments as a pastor for our church, like to sit down and seek the Lord. You'll never, ever regret that. Verse 17, besides, Abraham says, she really is my sister. She's the daughter of my father, though not of my mom, and she became my wife. Half-truth. We learned these in high school, didn't we? Technically, I was home, if you mean home being in the community. It's like, no, you're supposed to be at home in your bed by midnight? And I'm like, technically. Verse 13, and when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Sarah, everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. So, again, a couple of theologians were like, well, maybe this was a pattern, and it was such a pattern, scriptures didn't even share how often it happened. It's argument based on silence. All I know is that was their little pact, wherever we go. And she did that, by the way. And Abimelech said that, by the way, to the Lord. He's like, hey, she said, that's my brother, and he said, that's my sister. So, Lord, in this dream, I'm just going off what they said. Half-truth is still a lie. Abraham and Sarah were trying to deceive, and they were bearing false witness, and that could be a whole other sermon. But when we don't seek the Lord, y'all, we make foolish decisions. We make them based on fear. Number 6, but God. Once we confess, once we get right, God's blessing will follow. I could so many examples of this. But verse 14, Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves, gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah, his wife, to him. Thank you. And Abimelech said, my land is before you, live wherever you like. Okay, so what are the blessings going on here? Here's Sarah again. Sheep and cattle. I've got some servants that I'm giving to you, and we're going to see that he also gives him silver. Verse 16. I'm giving your brother, which is kind of a dig. He said to Sarah, I'm giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated. Abimelech. I kind of like Abimelech. So again, kind of a dig there, but so Abraham and Abimelech, they come together, and there's restoration, or at least authenticity and reconciliation. And Abimelech blesses him. Verse 17, then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and female slaves, so that it could have children again. For the Lord had kept all the women in Abimelech's household from conceiving because of Abraham's wife, Sarah. Finally, in verse 1 of chapter 21, and just about done here, when we make foolish decisions, number 7, God's delays don't always mean God's denials. Verse 1 of chapter 21, now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and he said, the Lord did for Sarah what he had planned. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time God had promised him. Just in chapter 18, Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. Son Isaac means laughter. And when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. He was promised, my friends, this was a 25-year wait. Now we know that Abraham had a son, Ishmael, but this was the first child Abraham and Sarah had ever had. And this was a very special individual, Isaac. And through Isaac is going to be the promise of the covenant. Why does God have us wait? Anybody impatient here? I certainly can be impatient. I'm not fun. When Amy and I first got married, there would be times where she's like, dude, man, you're stressing me out. Just chill. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm just impatient. I've grown a lot in that, but I'm still way too impatient. Why does God allow us to wait? It's because He calls us to walk by faith. Some of the worst things that happened in our culture were microwaves and being able to communicate with a cell phone immediately. Remember when you did letters? Some of us were in the age where we could write a letter to somebody and you had time to think about it. You might be mad about something, but after you kind of chewed on it and then you wrote them a letter and then the response. And now it's just like, whew. I should have thought about that before I sent that. My question for you this morning is, are you waiting to see a fulfillment of God's promise in your life today? Some of us have been. Some of us have prayed for our adult children, our young children, our grandchildren. Some of us are praying and we have a sense, it's like the Lord's told us, I've got my hand, I've got this individual's heart. I just don't give up. Just keep praying. And we eventually will see the fulfillment of the promise that God has given to us. God's delays, just never forget this, are not God's denials. Verse 6, Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, which is Isaac, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And we would. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Husbands and wives, if there's been something you've longed to experience as a couple, and here at 90 and 100 years old, they experience this for the very first time, this was, I could just see him like walking around crying all the time, right? God, you've brought me laughter. Oh, that's such good medicine. This last little slide here is the benefits of laughter. We Baptists get a bad reputation for always scowling and looking for the latest sin in someone's life, and then they believe, or the impression is because Jesus was so serious. Again, think of what is your favorite Jesus from Hollywood that's ever been done? Some of them are very stoic, and when I was a youth pastor, we called him Smiley Jesus, and I forget, but there was a Jesus film that came through, and I forget even the title of it, but he was always smiling until he got near the cross. That was kind of serious, but what's interesting, or what was great, was if you interpret all of his teachings with more of a smile and a coach than of a judgmental old person who's mean, you receive the teaching so much differently. But again, all the benefits of laughter. And in Luke 7, the Son of Man, this is what the Pharisees and Sadducees said about him. And you say, here's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. So if you're the Son of God and you're walking with your Father so closely that your enemies, would say that you are a friend of sinners, tax collectors, and you come across like you're a drunkard, maybe we all would have liked Jesus. Maybe we would have been like, wow, and maybe we all wouldn't have liked the Pharisees and the Sadducees. All right, 3 things I want you to do this week. Number 1, seek the Lord in all things. Seek the Lord in all things. There is nothing too small and nothing too big that we can't seek the Lord in all things. This should be a life moment where we switch and we're not like Abraham. Number 2, once confession of sin occurs, God's blessing will follow. He's going to make all things work together for good. So, if you have a tendency to hold on to stuff and not offer forgiveness, you're only hurting yourself. Once confession occurs, God's blessing is surely going to follow. And then number 3, just remember that God's delays are not His denial. And sometimes He just wants you to wait. Sometimes He wants you to go through a hard time because in your hard time you're praying like you haven't forever. Sometimes when you go through a hard time and you're having to wait and you're just like crying out to God, He's like, I love our relationship right now. You're so devoted to me. And I like that. Because as soon as I answer this prayer, I might not hear from you. Father, I pray that would not be of us. I pray that we would not be foolish in our relationship with you. I pray that we would seek you. When things are going well, when our bank accounts are fat and happy, just as when they are dry and skinny. God, I pray that we would lean into you. I pray that we would seek you. I pray that we would not lose heart and that we would not make foolish decisions, that we would trust in you and follow you with all of our heart. Jesus, thank you for this time and this incredible reminder from our father Abraham of faith. In Jesus' name I pray.